So we're covering an introduction to CBT. I now know that at least one of you's had lots of CBT as a client and found it helpful and beneficial. This is for those of you, for all of you, but for those particularly who've heard of it, but you're not quite sure what exactly it is, what's it based on. So my job is to, in a simple, straightforward way, give you background. I'll give you an introduction briefly to myself and to Transformations Institute, which, as I explained earlier, is now primarily online, although we've had some retreats here in Morocco and some visits to the UK, but I haven't been back actually teaching face-to-face in Dubai for just over 2 years now. So I'll then give you a bit of background as to how CBT fits into all the plethora of different therapies and modalities that there are. You know, big, thick, chunky books we teach on our full-length diploma courses, training people as fully fledged psychotherapists, UK accredited, etc. Actually, my job, as I said, is to put it in context of how it came about, what its principles are, and how it's applied. And also because I usually get, and already one of you said you trained in hypnotherapy, I was training people in hypnotherapy for many years in Bahrain and in the UAE, and sometimes also having people from other parts of the world, from India, Pakistan, Mauritius, etc. But that was face-to-face work. So now, as I said, I'm doing things mainly online. And therefore, I'm going to give you a bit of application in relation of hypnotherapy and CBT, because they are both, and most people don't know this, they know CBT is evidence-based, which it very much is, but actually hypnotherapy is evidence-based. And as you'll see, it was actually the very first psychological therapy. So the reputation that it has for being a bit out there, a bit flaky and so on is completely undeserved and based largely on misunderstanding of what hypnotherapy actually is. So hopefully sorry? I got it. What was that? I heard a question from someone. No? Okay, I'll continue then. So what this event is primarily directed at people who are somehow connected with working in the field of well-being, caring and health. And I'm going to explain why it is the most widely recommended therapy and most popular therapy at the moment. If you look overall at all the different kinds of referrals and so on, it's the one that doctors, health professionals, health insurance companies and so on feel most comfortable with. So I'll explain a bit about why that is. And like everything that we do at Transformations Institute, the focus is on applied positive psychology. So positive psychology is a very broad field, but it focuses on resilience, strength, self-empowerment, and so on. It's not the old model of people who are broken and need fixing, etc. So I'm going to place it in that context. So just a brief introduction for myself. This is the probably most crowded slide in terms of logos, but I put them there so that you can see we're actually very concerned about quality and standards. So everything that we do just about is UK accredited by one of the leading institutions for, well, associations, bodies for therapists who come from an integrative background in the UK. So that's the National Council. It was called the National Council of Psychotherapists, and now it's the National Council of Integrative Psychotherapists. And very shortly, hopefully this year, it's going to be put in the accreditation level up there with the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, and that's BACP, and also the UK Council for Psychotherapy. So that's the gold standard. So anyone who trains with us will pretty much found that around the world, their qualifications will be accepted because they are UK qualifications and certifications. There are a few exceptions. We also have some courses that we run in association with Canadian Trainer, which are accredited by the Canadian Counsellors and Psychotherapists Association. We're accredited with the Complementary Natural Healthcare Council in the UK, which was set up by government to regulate and set the national training standards and professional standards for the various professions that were outside of bodies that were already existing. So that's managed by the Professional Standards Authority. And so this one is American, that's the National Association for Cognitive Behavioral Therapists, who I've been a member of over a number of years, and the Society of Stress Managers. So you can see there's the NLP logo there. Again, many people teach all sorts of different NLP with lots of different bodies. That's the original and only Society of NLP that's run by the original creator and co-founder of NLP, Dr. Richard Bandler. So all of these accreditations we have, so anything we do, unless it's just a short workshop like this or a short introductory course, is accredited by one of these bodies, and in many cases several bodies. And we did a lot of that when we moved to Bahrain and then to the UAE, because we found that an awful lot of people were running courses that weren't accredited by anybody that we would recognize, and the curriculum wouldn't tick the boxes. So I just say, without any apology, we work to UK standards rather than worrying about, you know, is it with one of the bodies, for example, in the UAE, people are accepting when people have done their professional training, their continuing professional development with us. It's no good for us going to things like the Knowledge Human Development Authority, because they only go up to certificate level, and our courses are at between level 5 and level 7, which is postgraduate, postgraduate level in terms of the kind of material that we cover. Okay, so enough about us, except to say we don't just say this ourselves, so you don't have to believe what I say. We actually have, you know, the support of our peers and people who are in the field. So this is a picture of Phil and myself showing off a bit in London, standing outside the Ritz in London, receiving the School of the Year, which we've actually received twice during the phase that they were doing this, where APHP, that's the Association for Professional Hypnosis and Psychotherapy, it's a UK-based international association, selected us from all the schools they had around the world that were accredited as the best school in terms of the quality and the quantity of the graduates that we trained. So we like to have that as our, I think it's called social proof nowadays, you know, that it's not just what we say about ourselves, but it's how other professionals in the field see us. And I'm actually a diplomate, which means a lifelong member at the highest level of that organization. And Phil he's got a title as well, but I can't remember what it is, but it's the next one along. So I wanted to ask you now to do a little bit of work and to at least answer one question. There are many different people working in the field and have different roles in mental health, and I put some of them up there. And as you can see, I've said all can incorporate CBT into their work. Why do you think there is an asterisk by the first of the roles on that list, which is psychiatrist? What's the difference between a psychiatrist and anyone else on that list? Whoops, sorry, slip aside. What does a psychiatrist do? Yes, Samra, would you like to answer that question?
Hi, yes, so they're a medical physician, so doctors, and they've done their medical training, and also they can prescribe medicines, so your antidepressants and the medicines which are required in psychiatry. But as far as I'm aware, they don't have to be trained with any form of CBT or anything like this. It's just clearly and purely for that kind of part of things, the more medicalized side.
Okay, that's a pretty much a 10 out of 10 answer. Many people, I point this out because many people don't understand, even sometimes people who you would think would know, who are therapists or counselors or work in the field of well-being and healing and coaching. A psychiatrist is the only one of these who is a medical doctor. Of course, psychiatric nurses and people are medical professions. We've trained many physios, midwives, as someone was, sharing being a, well, it was you, wasn't it, sharing being a midwife, but they, and others, some doctors obviously prescribe medication, including antidepressants, so-called, who are not psychiatrists, they're just GPs or whatever. So psychiatrists aren't the only ones who can prescribe medication, but none of the others on that list can prescribe medication, only a doctor, medical doctor, or psychiatrist. And you're quite right, and I'm glad you raised the point that they may have been lucky enough to have gone to a training, a university or medical school, which actually included some CBT or other kinds of therapy within the training, but they don't have to have it. And the vast majority don't actually get trained as therapists or counselors. And you'll see that later on when we come to look at the two people whose work CBT was based on, because one was a psychiatrist and one was a clinical psychologist, and both of them felt the need to go and actually do training as therapists, and before they worked with people, and then found the training they had as therapists wasn't effective. And so therefore, it's very important, and I will mention it as we go along. And any of you who do the course with us, either the upcoming one or one in the future, will know that we have very strong views about this, because the entire field of mental health is based on completely false premises, in the sense that the fashionable view for the last 30, 40 years, since psychiatrists decided to get taken more seriously as specialists, because they weren't seen as being particularly, you know, like other kinds of physical doctors who work with physical conditions, to define the problem as mental health as being based on brain chemistry problems. And there's absolutely no sound evidence base for this view whatsoever. And in fact, some of the material and research that's being done now is completely undermining, and there are more and more books coming out now. For example, books like Cracked, Why Psychiatry is Doing More Harm Than Good. The view that a pill or some chemical interventions, or even electrical, like electroconvulsive therapy, or even at its extreme, some form of surgery is necessary to fix mental health problems. And 99.9% of people, that is not true. And certainly about 95% of people don't need the kind of interventions they get. Indeed, they could make them worse, not better. So I'm not going to go into detail on that, but and I'm happy to answer questions for anyone who wants to challenge what I've just said, but I can assure you that I've done my research on this for many years, and this is something that is really unfortunate, because the general public has a totally misguided view of what mental health problems are. Of course, people do have mental health problems and often suffer horribly, but giving them drugs or electroconvulsive therapy or extreme surgery is not the answer to their problems. All the other people here, including psychiatrists, of course, can use CBT, and some do, the most successful ones do. And I've trained, by the way, psychiatrists who wanted either CBT, and in some cases they know CBT, but they wanted hypnotherapy because they wanted to add. Do you still have a follow-up question, Samra? Just letting you know, because your hand's still up there, just so.
Oh, no, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you for sharing. That was, as I said, saved me answering it, as you did it so nicely. And those that you mentioned, you know, hypnotherapy and so on. Hypnotherapy was, as I mentioned, oh, excuse the cuckoo, it's 5 minutes early. And by the way, it still cuckoos the number of times for Dubai time scale. Even though when we moved to Morocco, I adjusted the hands and it shows the correct time for here, the cuckoo it's identified with Dubai, and it will not stop doing the number of cuckoos on the hour, 5 to the hour. So it'll go again once before, around the time just before we finish. Okay, so all these other people can integrate CBT principles into their work, but this is the only one on this list. These might sometimes give the medication, administer the medication that's prescribed by the psychiatrist or by the other doctor, GP, but none of the others work with drugs, drug therapy. Okay, so I said I'd say a little bit about psychological approaches and how CBT fits into that. Now, the early days of psychology was really the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th. So it's a very young discipline in terms of having a fully fledged discipline that's an academic discipline. And this is where I find it a bit cheeky, and sometimes even maybe more so than cheeky. I think it's sometimes deeply flawed to leave out the history, because most people don't realize that Freud, who you probably recognize, the one on the left, actually practiced his very first form of psychological discipline that he used. He was a doctor, he was a neurologist, as indeed were the first people who worked in the field of psychology with patients. And he studied hypnosis in France with Charcot and Bernheim and a number of French neurologists who were working within mental hospitals, which were pretty awful places in those days, where people were basically locked up and the key throw away. It was regarded that mental health asylum, if you were mad, you would never get better. And they started looking at ways that they could actually work. And they believed that something to do with the nervous system, if it could be soothed, if it could be put into a state of what we might refer to as trance in hypnotherapy. I call it deep relaxation, which is a natural state that human beings all experience. We all do, in and out of through the day, when we daydream, when we're falling asleep, when we're waking up. And the whole kind of hoo-ha about it is largely based on media hype and so on. It can be misused and abused, usually in the field of psyops, in military contexts and so on, where it can be incorporated with torture techniques. That is to say, the negative, the dark side, the black magic side of things, incorporated with torture, as I said, with inflicting pain, sleep deprivation. That's nothing to do with hypnotherapy. So Freud practiced it for the first part of his career, but he found he wasn't very good at it. This is his own words. And so he moved over into the psychoanalytic free association and starting to formulate his theories, which, by the way, although he saw himself as a man of science and so on, are based largely on Greek myths. So if you've never read Freud, it's interesting to see how scientific he actually isn't. This lady here is Melanie Klein. But the point of having this here is to say this is what we would call deficit psychology. It's the belief that something's broken, there's something wrong with you, and we need to fix it. And you need a specialist to do that for you because you're not capable of really fixing yourself. And in Freud's view, it needed about 10,000 hours. So you basically, you and your therapist have quite a long-term relationship, maybe seeing them once or twice a week for up to 10 years in order to solve your problems. And the problem is with that is there's no actual evidence that that does solve problems. People get to understand their problems and their history and so on very well. But if you think of Woody Allen, you know, the filmmaker and comedian, and he's made many films which are based on his own hang-ups. And I'm sure he'd be the first to admit that even though I think he's probably in his 80s now, he still has fear of death, fear of powerful women, and a fear of having a small penis. So, I mean, that's not a therapeutic healing. What that is an intellectual understanding, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily get better. So we're not great fans of that approach. So we owe a debt of gratitude for Freud for his work and understanding of subconscious impulses, but not much else, frankly. Now we move to what became the thing that came in after Freud set up psychoanalysis and became seen as being the father of psychology, which he actually wasn't, but he had very good PR. His nephew, Louis Bernays, was the inventor of PR, propaganda, etc., very influential in the 20th century. And he invited Uncle Siggy to go to America, where he said, we'll turn you into a superstar, basically. And he did. And he's now seen as being the first one. And he wasn't, but he had the best PR. So this behavioral psychology moves from there's something wrong to saying, well, there's something going on. So it's based on observation. It's based on empirical data. The only problem is that it's largely based on observation of animals. And this guy here, you probably heard of, and I'll mention him as we go through, is Pavlov, famous for his research on the salivating dogs. And this is Skinner, who followed on from Pavlov. But what they did was observe dogs, pigeons, etc. Then Skinner started talking about humans, and he basically just extrapolated from his data on watching animals to say this is how humans are. Basically, we're just animals and we can be easily manipulated, etc. So I was not a great fan of behavioral psychology initially because I saw it as being very deterministic. It didn't allow for free will, etc. But it's moved on along from there, as I'll mention as we go through. We had a big breakthrough then in the mid-20th century. There's something right, and the beginning of what you might call humanistic psychology, sometimes called existential or psychology of being. And believe it or not, this guy, Abraham Maslow, you may have seen his pyramid of needs. It's quite popular in communication and organizational psychology and understanding human needs and structures. He's the first psychologist that said, why are we always studying people when there's something wrong with them? Why do we always look at people who are having major problems and can't cope? Why don't we study people who are functioning okay, who manage with their problems? Why don't we start looking at what people are doing right? And so he was the first really of what became known, as I said, as humanistic and person-centered, client-centered psychology and counseling, where we take the view that people have got things that are right with them, that they're fundamentally have got okay, but they've got twisted up, messed up by life, by conditioning, by not knowing how to manage their emotions and their thoughts. And then we move into something very new in terms of academic disciplines, and that's positive psychology. And this has only been around for 24 years as an academic discipline. And Seligman, this is Martin Seligman, and you'll see on the next slide his colleague here, Mikhail, I haven't said it for a while now, there's YouTube videos on how you pronounce his name, Csikszentmihalyi. And they produced, as you'll see in a moment on the next slide, a manifesto for positive psychology. They both came up through behavioral psychology, standard behavioral psychology, as is taught in most university psychology departments and so on. Seligman actually became the chair of the American Psychological Society, but they moved on and they came up with their prospectus here, where they said basically people are good, they're resourceful, and there's something even better. It's not just saying who does well, but actually who are the outliers, who are the ones who do things really, really well. And so they said in their statement, we believe a psychology of positive human functioning will arise, which achieves a scientific understanding and effective interventions to build thriving individuals, families, and communities. So this was the start of a wave of new degree courses. We've been associated with the first one set up in the UK. There's now, I think, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 of them, which focus on applied positive psychology and research into things like happiness, well-being, resilience, how do people cope with trauma, and all sorts of things which are designed to empower and to benefit people so that they aren't seen as being, sick, broken, needing to be drugged for the rest of their lives, etc. And that's something that we support entirely. And it's one of the reasons we incorporate a number of modalities, because this is a marriage between neuroscience, psychology, and if you like, the best of the communication and skills-based approaches. So CBT has actually got its roots way before the last 100, 150 years that I've been referring to. It actually goes back to the days of the Greco-Roman and Eastern philosophies, and it uses what we call an inductive or Socratic approach to reasoning. And what that means is from the specific, then going to the general. So first of all, you chunk down. If any of you've done any NLP will know in NLP, we have a meta model and we have the Milton model. And that means that when you're going to chunk down, it means if someone says to you, well, I'm depressed, your question would be not how long have you been depressed, why are you depressed, or, etc. But you'd actually say, when you say depressed, what exactly do you mean? Can you describe that for me? When was the last time you felt depressed and how did you feel? Where did you feel it in your body? What exactly was going on? What happened just before you had that feeling? So it's going for the really specific information rather than accepting general statements. Once you've got to the specifics, then sure, you can chunk up and you can start applying general principles. But the thing is to get to what for that individual. So rather than seeing depression as just a word, or, this is depression and all these millions of people have got it, taking each individual, what is it that they do that depresses themselves? What do they think that causes them to feel depressed? What situations trigger them feeling negative emotions and feelings that go with depression? It's based on a number of Stoic philosophy principles, again from the Greek times, where people actually wanted to learn how to deal with things rather than to get all upset about them, you could say. So we're not talking about repression and stiff upper lip. We're talking about learning things that actually help you to be resilient, help you to not sweat the small stuff, as they say, to actually find some learning, some meaning in tragedy, in pain, in suffering and loss, so that you can become a wiser, stronger and better person. And also taking mindfulness meditation techniques and an understanding of the human psyche from a philosophical and psychological perspective based on some of the Eastern concepts of mindfulness, meditation. And we're not talking about religion. So sometimes we say, oh, Buddhism, that's a religion. It's wrongly called one of the 5 major religions. Sometimes people treat it like a religion and revere Buddha as if it is a god. But I personally don't understand how you can call something a religion when it doesn't have a god. It doesn't have a belief in an all-knowing God. It has a belief in understanding yourself and becoming one, becoming enlightened as to your oneness with the rest of living beings. So you can be a Muslim, a Christian, an atheist, a Jew. You can be any form of religion and practice mindfulness techniques and benefit from them. And so I just want to clarify that, because sometimes when people see the word meditation, I know when I was living in the UAE, we were shocked to find if a book had the word spiritual in the title, it wasn't allowed to be imported into the UAE. We ordered some things, we tried to order things from Kinokuniya, and no, it's got the word spiritual in it, because there's this sort of misunderstanding that spiritual means something other than Islam or whatever. And you know, it's not just about Islam. Lots of religions take the same view. So this tradition is reflected in the more recent forms of CBT, which was developed some time ago now, and it's come on quite a lot. The mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, is actually based on mindfulness-based stress reduction program, which I noticed that Illuminations, I think it was, had someone teaching the program, a version of it anyway. And this is based on a program that's a master's at Oxford University in the UK, which incorporates Buddhist mindfulness techniques into cognitive therapy. And there are other variations you may have come across or seen if you've been looking around the field. A very popular one is ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, which is basically cognitive therapy, but it incorporates acceptance, and it's very similar to dialectical behavioral therapy. And dialectical behavioral therapy is based on, developed by a psychologist called Marcia Lynham. You can see I've shown her in rapport with the Shakyamuni Buddha there, both doing leaning on their hands and contemplating. And the difference between standard cognitive behavioral techniques for regulating emotions, reality testing, etc., distress tolerance, acceptance, mindful awareness from Buddhist meditation, the difference between dialectical and other, it's similar to ACT that I mentioned, is that she found working with people with more extreme forms of mental health difficulties, so-called borderline personality disorders, bipolar disorders, etc. People in more extreme distress needed to accept themselves where they were, whereas traditionally CBT focuses on change and helping people to change as quickly as possible into more positive, helpful, beneficial, functional ways of thinking and feeling and behaving. She found that actually people needed to accept where they were before they could move on, and that often people who are stuck in depressed states or very, very unhelpful, dysfunctional states actually were terrified of change, because survival depends on being here, right? So if what you've done, even if it's very dysfunctional, has kept you alive, people are very afraid of letting go of their behaviors and strategies. So that's what she found has been very successful in working with people, as I said, in more extreme areas of the field. It has a bit more emphasis on group work and a team approach between mental health professionals, but it's been very successful with particular client groups. So you can see here a quote. There are websites around called fake Buddha quotes and so on, but I believe that this one, like many of the masters and teachers and prophets over the years, Buddha didn't write things down as far as we know, the historical Buddha, and it's their followers and their students and so on that do. But this very much is found as a theme throughout Buddhist philosophy and psychology, which is that we are what we think, we create ourselves by what we repeatedly think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. In other words, the more we think, the more we create ourselves in certain ways. And with our thoughts, we make the world. It's certainly in relation to our own world. So it doesn't mean that your thoughts create the external objective world, but your thoughts certainly have a huge influence on your internal subjective reality and world. And so CBT works very much with this principal triad of the thought, feeling, and behavior. So I'll come to that in a moment. So just to reiterate the origins, I mentioned Pavlov and Skinner. Pavlov won the Nobel Prize for Physiology in the early 19th century for his work with animal behavior. As I said, on the full course that I teach, we have a look at his work with dogs and salivation and creating what he called conditioned reflexes. And then we have Skinner, following on from Pavlov, who developed what he called operant conditioning. He was what we call a radical atheist. He had no time whatsoever for any kind of religion or spiritual beliefs. He said, you know, basically humans are animals that can be manipulated, And he based his work with pigeons and how pigeons can be conditioned into doing certain things to get their rewards. And if I tell you that some of his biggest fans were people like Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda chief, and Louis Bonnet, who did all the conditioning of women to start smoking, to see it as a feminist act, to get political parties to get power based on PR exercises and so on. So a lot of this is what has got some of the psyops a bad name. In other words, manipulating people by using fear and reward, and we'll come to motivation again soon. But then we started moving into, from the latter part of the 20th century, more what you might call more humanistic approaches that used observation of behavior, but also accepted the notion of a degree of free will, at least. Some would say a lot, some not so much so, and things like systematic desensitization, in other words, unlearning fear. So clients were encouraged to actually learn how to control the stress button, the fear response, the stress response, going right up to a full-on 10, 100%, how to get that to come down by systematically being exposed to certain things and developing a thicker skin, you could say, towards them. They used to do what they called flooding, which was throw people in at the deep end, and that's proved not to be so successful. It works for some people, but it's very, very traumatic for others. So that's developed as a useful way of doing things. And he was the one who developed assertiveness training, which became very popular through the 70s and 80s and part of the women's movement, which is, look, I behave in certain ways, I react in certain ways, I could train myself, I can learn by practice how to be more assertive, how to say no, how to stand my ground, how to challenge some of my thinking and feeling. And so that became very positive in the sense of empowerment, and not the idea of there being something wrong with people. And then we have a multimodal approach, someone called Lazarus, developing behavioral therapy, which integrated a number of other modalities and a whole bunch of other people, and some research on anxiety disorders. So I hope you can see from this that the research continued and started being more relevant to people, to human beings, rather than just based on observing animals. So here we come to the father and grandfather, as they're sometimes known, of CBT. Until year before last, I was able to refer to Becker still being alive because he died in November 2021 at the age of 100. And Ellis died quite a bit sooner. But these two therapists have interesting ideas and developments, and I'm just sharing this with you because you can see this is not an example of collaboration. These are ideas, very, very similar ideas, based on two individuals working and finding the limitations of the model I was talking about before, the sort of Freudian analytic model, analyzing your past, your childhood, reliving, going over and over again, traumas, etc. So Ellis was a psychologist who was a radical humanist, and he went out after training as a psychologist and wanted to be able to work with patients, or clients in his case, as psychologist. And so he trained in analytic therapies, traditional psychotherapy a la Freud. But he found it ineffective. He found it didn't help his clients. And so he started developing his own more active and directive form of therapy, in which, as you can see, the therapist's job is to help the client to understand that his core or her core irrational beliefs lead to emotional pain. That's to say things like catastrophizing, I forgot my keys. Oh no, that's awful. It's the end of the world. And how people put themselves into unresourceful states and started to be triggered more and more easily and suffer anxiety states and get depressed because they were actually thinking irrationally. And he developed a model of what he called the ABCs, the activating events that lead to beliefs and consequences. Now, Beck, who was somewhat younger, so that's why he tends to be called the father, but he went on a lot longer, he lived a lot longer than Ellis did, was a psychiatrist. So he was a medical doctor, but again, he felt he didn't have applied skills from his psychiatric training. He didn't feel that he had the skills to be able to work with people as well as he'd like. So he went on to train and practice psychotherapy, analytic psychotherapy, very similar to Ellis. He found that the psychoanalytic theory wasn't adequate. It didn't do the job. It didn't help his depressed clients to get better. And so in the 60s, he started developing a model which he called cognitive processing, teaching clients to identify and change their negative thought patterns. You can see very similar to what Ellis was doing. And he called his system cognitive therapy. And he was also developed psychometric instruments for measuring depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. His questionnaires are often still used to identify depression therapy. I actually share them with our students when they're training as therapists. And he did pioneering work, not only using CBT in general and with depression, which was a lot of his patients, I say patients because he worked as a doctor, pioneering work with patients assessed as being schizophrenic. Now that's something that really hadn't happened much or was very little considered. People who were given the labels of more extreme kinds of mental health problems weren't often considered to be suitable for analytic therapy. They were basically drugged, as I said, given ECT or surgery or whatever. It wasn't considered that they could be healed. You're basically schizophrenic for life. Beck didn't accept that. He was looking for things that would actually help. So he used CT, his cognitive therapy, often in combination with medication, but his job, his purpose was to get people off the medication and to become essentially their own therapists, to understand themselves and not need to have drugs. Now, this is interesting because they didn't actually get together and meet until quite late on in their lives, particularly Ellis's life, because they were brought together for sort of an evening in conversation by the American Psychological Association, did an evening with Beck and Ellis, because a lot of people started seeing that there was a lot of similarities between their approaches. Experimental research to test their hypotheses, both at a clinical and basic level. They were interested in finding out what works pragmatically, not in having a theory and then trying to make people fit the theory. And common features of both their approaches, which people started to combine as cognitive behavioral therapy, a combination of the two. Some of their techniques were absolutely identical and many were very similar. Common features are the focus on the here and now, rather than dragging up the past over and over again. Giving the therapist a directive or guidance role, not telling their clients what to do, but to actually have a structured approach and encouraging the clients to take action, to do things, and to have structured sessions and to focus on alleviating both symptoms and the patient's vulnerability, to give them more resilience, more ability to withstand challenges. And the basis of the model of both of them was that thoughts, what we think, affects how we feel and act. Emotions, how we feel, affects what we think and do, and behavior. So what we do affects how we think and feel. So as you can see, it's a dynamic triad. It's not, we tend to work in a structured way, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, but never are we saying this is how it has to go. Each of them has a feedback loop onto the other, but we do look at all these very specifically in cognitive therapy. So it's a very structured approach, which is why it's very helpful to people who are working perhaps in a looser way and would like something where they've actually got a structure to work within, especially with clients who are chaotic, who don't really know what they want to work on or feel very stuck where they are. It's a great way to get in there and start chipping away at the basics of how people get unhappy and get stuck. So cognitive behavioral therapy looks at everything that goes on in our mind, our memories, images, thoughts, attention. So everything that you might say is emotional, psychological. Our behavior, that's everything we do. So what we say, how we act, and also how we avoid action, because that in itself is a form of behavior, procrastination or avoiding action. And also, how do we go about solving problems? Because you've probably heard the saying, if you do the same thing you've always done and expect to get different results, that's a definition of madness. You're not going to get different things to happen by doing the same old, same old. So the therapist works with the client to find out how they go about solving problems, where they are effective in solving problems and where they're not, so that they can start actually using their existing resources and applying those skills as transferable skills to areas where maybe they don't do so well. And of course, therapy is a systematic approach to health and well-being, where you overcome or effectively deal with a problem, illness, or a regular condition. So the central concept of CBT is we feel the way that we think and we act accordingly. Now, I want to say something about, sorry, it's going away. Okay, about motivation, because CBT is very keen on lasting change, not what we might call sticking plaster or band-aid. So you feel a bit better when you go and event and tell someone and they say, oh, you know, I feel so much better. I've told you stuff I haven't told anyone, or I don't feel it's okay to say. And that can be healing in itself, but it doesn't tend to bring about lasting change. It's a form of release. But what we're looking for is long-term change. And the problem is that we're very often taught and expected to be motivated to learn and to change by extrinsic motivation, what I mentioned Skinner called operant conditioning. And what we actually need is intrinsic. In other words, we need to want to change internally. There's an old joke that goes in the world of therapy. I don't know if any of you've heard it. How many therapists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is only one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. And the point is that if you don't really want to change, you can apply operant conditioning, right? Usually carrots and sticks, punishment, lockdowns, you know, you'll be in trouble, you'll be fined, you'll be fired, etc., if you don't do what you're told, and you'll be rewarded. If you do, you'll be given rewards, you'll be given social approbation, you'll be told you're a good person, you're doing it for the community. You know, how good of you. If it's in some other field, it's like you're rewarded by money. I believe in America, they were rewarding people for having vaccines by very healthy, by giving them free McDonald's meals, or even entering them into lotteries. So reward punishment is the standard way to get people to be motivated. And of course, it's very ineffective. It will give a temporary change, but I looked at some research many years ago at giving people pay rises. And they found, anyone actually want to guess this? How long did the average pay rise motivate people to perform better at work? Anyone have any idea? Take a guess. I know there's 22 of you out there. One of you can guess. How long do you think it lasts when someone gets given a pay rise? How long do they get motivated by that pay rise?
$10.
Wow, you are an optimist. 2
Oh.
weeks on average. 2 weeks before they get used to the pay rise and start feeling hard done by if they're not happy in their job. If they don't enjoy their job, if they don't feel that they got recognition, if they don't have the level of responsibility given to them with the power to actually do something to apply that responsibility. So if you're happy for 10 years with your rise, you're a very, very patient person indeed. But the average person is only a couple of weeks or so. So it means that you've got to have internally the motivation to want to change in order to keep that change going, keep the momentum going. And what CBT deals with is cognition, which is the thoughts, affect, which is your emotions. And I find most people have heard of those terms, but conation, a lot of people haven't. Conation is your, if you like, your volition, your willpower, how you act on your thoughts and feelings. And what it doesn't deal with is biology and spirituality, because biology is something which, of course, you can affect, but you're starting to get into other sorts of modalities, trauma release, body work, breath work, etc. And to some degree, maybe understanding neurology. And spiritual is transpersonal and it steps outside of cognitive behavioral therapy. But CBT works on all these areas. And see, here's the thing where they meet. Social cognition. Yes, I've got a question from Fatima. What's your question, Fatima?
Yeah, hi. So there is no use of the extrinsic factor for the motivation to learn. I mean, only the intrinsic factor will help.
Largely, I'm talking about lasting change, right? So if I say I'm going to thump you one, you're likely to do what I tell you to. As soon as I'm not around threatening to thump you, then you're probably not going to do it. And any of you who are parents who've learned to be wise parents, you'll know that rewarding and punishing really doesn't bring about change unless the person really wants to change for themselves or understands the need to change. I'm not talking about you sometimes need to impose sanctions or control, especially protecting children and so on, but I'm talking about longer term. No, it does. There's no research that shows essentially people. The only exception to that would be if you break down someone's personality, as in torture and so on. Yes, if you keep them in a state of constant fear, as has happened over the last 3 years globally, I'm very interested in the whole subject of mass formation psychosis and how people come to be traumatized so that they'll do more or less anything they're told. And sadly, there's a lot of work done in psychology. It's, as I say, it's the dark side of the human being and our stress response and our animal nature, is that a lot of research was done in the 50s, repeated in the 60s, and has been repeated more recently, which shows that people who are put into a state of an authority figure telling them what to do and feeling afraid will do more or less anything they're told, including things like administer what they think is an electric shock. In the research, of course, it's not a real shock, but that shock would actually kill people. And also, you know, the experiments done in prisons where graduates were put in prisons to play role play of prisoners and wardens and so on, they would actually start taking on those roles. So that's, as I said, we've got the humanistic, the positive side, but when people are in a state of fear, and you keep inducing the fear and you keep inducing the fear, they will tend to override their critical faculties, the reason gets switched off, and they become willing to believe and to accept almost anything, even when you tell them contradictory things day after day. And again, it's a subject for a whole other webinar, and it's one I'd be cautious about how I promoted it. But there is a lot of evidence, more and more now, to show that a lot of what's been going on for the last few years, should we say, there's a huge amount of experimental psychology, some of which is, as I said, is to me very, very unethical, that's been going on with the population. So I'm not saying there is no effect to be motivated to comply, but what I am saying is to learn and to develop and to keep change and last change and feel empowered. No, the extrinsic factors don't play much a part in that, except, as I said, in this area. Remember that pyramid of needs I mentioned? In the pyramid of needs, in Maslow's pyramid of needs, they often show it as a 5-part, and the original one was a 7-part pyramid. But in the middle of that is the need to be loved and accepted, to want to be part of a community, to have status, etc. So internally, we want to be accepted, we want to be loved, and that's where it meets the external. Because if you don't get the approval of your authority figures, of your mom, dad, teachers, co-workers, etc., then you're very likely to be unhappy, especially if you're the sort of personality that runs on approval. So this is where, yes, the two can meet, but without that, and without these other factors, that I'm saying that change will not tend to last. It's why when people get put on medication and then taken off it, they tend to revert to the same behaviors, because they haven't had the learning experience that they would get by engaging in effective therapy. Does that answer your question sufficiently for now?
Yeah, it is. Thank you so much.
Great, you're welcome. Okay, so in CBT, we say there is a bit of jargon here. I'm keeping the jargon to a minimum. We represent our experience into self-schema. That's to say we have a well-developed self-concept of ourselves, which we obviously develop over our lives and experience, whereas many forms of therapy talk about the first 7 years being the most dominant in terms of forming your personality. CBT says, yes, that's important, but CBT actually looks up until about 15 years old, going through adolescence, etc., which is why this whole issue of the gender identity and so on is a contentious one, because we're still forming our sense of self until we're well into adolescence in our mid-teens. So we get this self-schema that we've developed, and it's particularly powerful for the things that are personally important to us. And we have well-developed concepts of ourselves. So someone says, I'm friendly, I'm a people person. Someone else says, I don't trust others, I'm shy. And that becomes their way of identifying themselves. This becomes our schemata, which is a package of self-knowledge. This is how we understand ourselves. And the thing is, with this in CBT will challenge even this, because it might look like, well, I'm friendly, I'm a people person. Isn't that positive? Well, not necessarily, because you're being a friendly people person might lead you to have been ripped off, taken advantage of, treated badly, treated as a doormat, and being unloved and unappreciated. And so it doesn't necessarily serve you to just have this view, I'm just a friendly people person. Similarly, someone might say, I don't trust others, I'm shy. Isn't that a negative point of view? Well, no, it may well be a strategy that's been adopted for self-protection by somebody who actually has found that other people have been untrustworthy, who have teased them, who've bullied them. And so it may well have been a useful defensive strategy, but in each case, it's looking at what aspects of it work for you, are functional, and which don't, so that in the CBT therapy, we can focus on addressing the strategies that don't work for you and aren't functional for you. And Beck's research showed that there was a significant correlation between the severity of depression and the degree of negative self-evaluation and pessimism. And there's a strong correlation that he found repeatedly between a negative view of the future and a negative view of the self. And so Beck had the theory that there was a cognitive triad in depression. As I said, he worked a lot with people who suffered from depression. And these were the three aspects: a negative view of the situation they're in, situational depression, it's sometimes called, a negative view of themselves, so a negative self-image in the self schemata, and a negative view of the future. In other words, the future is just going to be at least as bad as the past, and it may be even worse. People who hold those three views, worldviews, you could say, of situation, self, and future, will actually tend to be depressed. And in fact, further work was done in the 70s where Loeb and others show that this wasn't just a correlation, but actually a causation. In other words, if you went around running the thoughts that are here and the images, the emotions, the feelings that went with them, then you would tend to get stuck in a depressed state, often for a very long time, and be labeled as what gets called clinical depression. So I have a question, if anyone would like to come up with any ideas on this one. How might this be relevant to the huge increase in mental health problems over the past 3 years of lockdowns and ongoing COVID-19 and related measures and restrictions, especially for children and young people? If you've done any homework on this, if you've looked at it, if you've even just read the newspapers, let alone the psychological journals and so on, you'll see that there's been a massive increase in suicidal ideation and suicide attempts, but both by adults, but most worryingly by younger and younger people. Huge increase in incidents of self-harm, of divorce and all that goes with that in terms of negative emotions, loss of work and status at work, financial problems, all the things that feed into depression. So how might this be relevant to what people have been going through? I've given you a few pointers there. Anyone like to add what they've seen around them in terms of what's been happening in terms of mental health? I'm sure out of them now we've got, I think, 23 people. Somebody must be able to contribute on that, not wait for me to fill in all the gaps. Go ahead, please. We've all just been having a wonderful time, and everyone you know been having a wonderful time. You're one of those people who says, oh, I learned Chinese or Swedish. As a colleague of mine, I was able to just be peaceful and calm, and it was lovely. Was it like that all the time, especially if you have children, if those children had to be schooled on the computer or from home, not being able to go to the places you wanted to? Perhaps you've forgotten. Yes, Samra, you've raised your hand. Thank you. You're being very active. If I had brownie points to give, I'd give you.
Okay, interests me, that's why, I guess. Basically, a lot of, well, I can't clinically say anything, but OCD type tendencies, especially in children, there's a lot of focus on, even now the situation is becoming a lot calmer, but it's that constant kind of thought in the back of their mind. I've got 2 little ones. Do I need to wash my hands now? Do I need to regularly do this, do that? And especially initially when masks came off as well, it was strange for myself as well to see people's faces after a long time. You kind of have this image built up in how like someone looks and everything, and then you see them without a mask, and it's it's the fact that you're feeling anxious anyway, but then having this whole different perception of the world and the way the world is, really, and the way people look, because some people you've not met without a mask before.
Absolutely. And another excellent answer, Fatima. I'm really glad you volunteered. I'll come to someone else volunteered. I'll come to you in a moment. Just to follow up to what you said, there's actually been research published very recently by speech therapists in journals that, you know, I like to look across even in areas that it's not my particular specialisms. And one of the things that's come up is that children's speech development is now actually statistically can be demonstrated to have been delayed by the lack of being able to lip read, because we all unconsciously, through mirror neurons and modeling behaviors, we learn to understand speech and to speak ourselves. And so very young children have been very adversely affected by the mask wearing in that way, just as one example. I predicted at the beginning of the lockdowns that we'd see a massive increase in OCD behaviors, both in adults and in children. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So you've mentioned spot on those two. Who was the other person that had their hand up there? Somebody else wanted to answer, so please go ahead. Who was it that had their hand up? I saw a second person had their hand up. I'd like to hear from you as well. Was it Hadil or? Yeah, I don't know. I'm going back and forth because I can only see a certain number of names at once, and it doesn't still show now the other person. Who was the other person that had their hand up? Do go ahead. No? Okay. Well, it'd be nice to hear from somebody else, but okay. So if you just start to look around, you will see the evidence that shows that the cost, if you actually take out all the emotional stuff and you just look like a cost-benefit analysis, say you're an accountant doing a cost-benefit analysis of a particular investment or a company. If you just take that kind of rational attitude and step out of the emotional response, you will see that we're just beginning to see the iceberg tip of the results of what's happened. And my own personal prediction, which I'm quite happy to evidence for anyone interested, is that the cost has been far, far higher than any benefits that are claimed. And I think it's something that historically, I like to think the human race will survive and thrive again. And we're being told, we're being warned that it's all going to start all over again. And hopefully some people are not going to be quite so readily going along with this. But we're going to see huge cost to this, to the point that and I'd love to think that I was wrong, but I actually don't think, and people are far more up there and, you know, far more famous, far more learned people than I am, are saying we're going to see this, when people look back, they're going to see this as being an incredible tragedy for the human race, the way that this whole process was managed in terms of the effect on young people, particularly, and on children, and so on. So it's worth really reflecting on this. I'm not saying this to be commercial, but I'm saying there is going to be such a huge need. And already therapists I know, my organizations in the UK, are saying that they're busier than they've ever been before in terms of referral for mental health problems and so on. And particularly at the extreme end, as I said, of suicide attempts and you know, really big problems with young people and children. We're going to need as many good therapists as we can get. We already had a big shortage of CBT therapists back in 2006, before all of this happened with the depression report, but it's now there are whole areas where you can't get a referral to a therapist at all. There just aren't enough of them. So it's something which is, as I said, it's a win-win. The therapist is going to get plenty of opportunities to practice, but also people are going to need good therapists who are well trained. Okay, so I've seen someone's made the comment, in the beginning of the pandemic, when no one knew where headed and what future will bring, brought pessimism and hearing, and this was seen and observed by children who were hearing and seeing everything around, so they started being negative about the future, and that brought pessimism. Absolutely. The problem is, when you say no one knew, the vast majority of the population didn't know, but unfortunately a lot of people did know very well, and kept changing their story. And I think it's always extremely sad when you see when you see people who are already extremely rich, well beyond wealth that any individual needs, wanting to make more money out of people suffering. And unfortunately, that's what we've been seeing. And I feel very strongly about this because I do have clients and a family and students and so on. And I'm around long enough in my field, and sorry, I've lost the slide. Yeah, put it back. And I've been around in this field for long enough, and I have enough of a record. Having served as a dean in a leading research university, I don't feel the need to apologize for my views. They're based on research and they're based on using the scientific method. And I hate to see the scientific method get thrown out the window that it has been the last few years. I quite agree with you. Ordinary people had no idea, and they were being manipulated horribly to just have a fear response. And when people are in fear, they don't think rationally. It switches off the learning centers in the brain and it makes us go into freeze, fight mode. And it's really important that therapists understand the freeze, fight mode and how it works and what you can do to overcome it. And that's something I specialize in teaching on my courses. Okay, so thank you for your contributions on that. So back to the purpose of CBT is to first identify thoughts and feelings. I've got saying 2 participants have raised their hand. I need to get through the rest of the slides. So would you mind, those of you who have got questions and so on, if you could just hold them for a bit, because I will put them on. I will give you some time at the end to ask those questions or make those comments. So we teach people to identify their thoughts and beliefs by self-monitoring and education to learn, understand, and become eventually really your own therapist. That's the goal of CBT, to let people to become understanding of themselves. Virginia Satir, who is the mother of modern family therapy, not a CBT therapist, but she said something highly relevant, which is when she was younger and she observed how people behaved, her parents and adults behaved, she said to herself, when I grow up, I want to become a detective of people. I want to know what makes people tick, what makes them work. And her system, which is conjoint systemic therapy used in family therapy and so on, talks about it's not what happens to people, life is what it is. It's how they cope with it that counts. And so CBT is very strong on coping skills and understanding and identifying what it is that your triggers are so that you can take action to deal with them more effectively. So that's the purpose of CBT. It's outcome based, it's unapologetically solution focused. Doesn't mean you can't do more transpersonal, self-understanding, go on a spiritual journey, all of those things, but it's for dealing with those things that day to day mean that your life is dysfunctional in various ways. You might have it together in one area, but not in another. So CBT will focus not on the things where you're doing fine, but on the things where you're not doing fine and where you want to do better. And if you, even if you're coaching and you're not looking at therapy, but coaching is all about people who want to improve their performance, enhance their potential. So you need to look at what are you not performing at so well, where do you want to improve it in order to do the applications. So CBT focuses on the rationality and accuracy of our thinking, and where our thought processes, are they verifiable, are they accurate, or are they partially true or not true at all? CBT seeks to change those dysfunctional automatic negative thoughts into more rational and realistic ones. So it's not saying I'm perfect all of the time and everything is wonderful, but it is looking for, is it reasonable? Is it likely? Is it possible? Is it actually very unlikely? So that you can have a more realistic and rational approach. And this is why people like it, because it's very easily understandable. It's common sense. It's not full of all sorts of clever models and jargon and complicated understandings. It's something that ordinary people can get to grips with. And people are encouraged to notice, to record their emotional states, their triggers, and to undertake very practical daily activity schedules. So there's a lot of emphasis on filling in forms, or keeping a journal, setting certain targets to do, and then coming back and discussing how it went, what worked, what didn't work. And it's very much a 50-50 client-centered approach. So the therapist's job is to encourage, to guide, to challenge, and to get the client to do the work, to call them out on what they've been doing, and the client's job to do the work in between and to see what works, what happens. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. The structure is a useful one that can be applied to just about anything, but each individual client, you'll be tailoring what you do to that individual's needs. So the change process requires the client to start understanding that their thought process leads to a feeling process. So for example, if someone says, I'll never have a good job, then they tend to feel hopeless. And what does that mean? It means they don't even bother to send off their CV or to review it, to apply with the headhunting agencies and so on. They've given up before they've started. So absolutely, it's a self-fulfilling negative prophecy, right? Nobody likes me, so then I don't take invitations. I think people will just ask me because they're sorry for me. So I have no social life, I don't go out. So now that reinforces my belief that I'm lonely and I'm rejected. Whereas not saying everything's perfect, I'm brilliant, but saying I have solved problems before, well, that's a reasonable assumption. If you're still alive, it means you've learned how to do things to solve problems. That leads to a hopeful state of mind and a positive state of mind, because if you know you've solved problems before, then you can think about, how did I do that? What did I do that helped me to solve that problem? Could I apply that strength? So you're looking for the strengths that a client already has inside them, because often they've forgotten about that. It's like you were saying about masks. It's like they've had a mask on that's been hiding their positive strengths, what they're able to do. So if they can, I often tell my clients, if you can walk and talk, you've already mastered the two most difficult processes that human beings ever have to learn. And you did it before you were probably 3 years of age, walking maybe by even 1.5, and then, you know, jumping, skipping, hopping, walking. You got some words, you probably mastered sentences by 2 or 3. By the time you were 5, you were speaking pretty well. So if you can do that, you know, these other things are pretty easy and straightforward to do. Oh, I haven't thought about it that way. So you're doing a lot of reframing. So the stages of CBT, just to summarize then, are to normalize in stage 1. The CBT therapist aims to bring the client's scores, such as depression, back to the normal range, which, by the way, I tend to use the 80-20 Pareto principle. Doesn't mean you're going to be happy and have brilliant days every day, but about 80% of the time you'll be fine. And then maybe 20% you'll have an off day, a day when you get stressed or things seem to go wrong. You can bounce back from that like a Weeble doll. You know, it doesn't keep you down. So behavioral techniques that are used, which is where, again, things you already know how to do can be incorporated, plus you can learn new skills. So things like using the kind of breathing that induces the relaxation response. In other words, put yourself into a self-hypnotic relaxation state. Daily activity schedules to actually look at what you do, what's useful, what's beneficial, what things make you feel better, what things make you feel worse. Pleasure ratings, instead of measuring only pain and stress, let's measure what gives you pleasure. Let's measure what you enjoy. And experiments, so that you take this curiosity and which is again very much an NLP concept, which goes very well with CBT, controlled exposure. Right, if I drive down that street, that's a bit too much. How about driving down the street near it? So I know it's nearby, but I'm not going down that street. And I know I can do that, and it only stresses me out a little bit. So just beginning to actually tap away and chip away at those big things so that they become small things, and reflecting and reviewing on your progress. And we change the program. It's about changing your own programming. So you start to identify and challenge those negative automatic thoughts that just pop up in your mind that have become a habit. Habits can be changed. It only takes about 21 repetitions to change a simple habit. A bit more for a more complicated one, but we break it down. Remember, I said we chunk down bite-sized pieces. Analyze the errors in logic, which depressed and distressed people normally make, and use that Socratic inductive questioning and guided discovery so that we can challenge and rewrite these thoughts in a more balanced, realistic way. So it takes about 5 sessions minimum to learn to identify and challenge those automatic negative thoughts and the sorts of things that trigger them for each individual. So the client will ask themselves, what went through my mind? What was going through my mind just before I started to feel this way? And together, the client and therapist draw up a list of, say, 5 or 6 of the presenting problems and the likely thinking errors. And the client starts to be an observer of themselves to reality test these negative thoughts as hypotheses to test, not accepting that they're facts, but actually testing them. This is what encourages the development of critical thinking. And alternative ways of thinking can be substituted for the original negative automatic thoughts that are more balanced and reflect the client's experience more accurately and realistically. And by the way, this encourages the use of logic and reason, which stimulates a different part of the brain that counters the automatic stress response. And then part two is basically to work with the deeper core beliefs and schemas, the unconscious. And this is where if you bring in hypnotherapy and somatic approaches, body-based approaches, can be very useful to speed the process up. So they might think it's plausible. I've got a negative automatic thought around a particular theme, and you get to what those themes are. And they usually boil down to versions of, I'm not good enough, I'm worthless, I'm never going to be able to change, etc. And the client starts to recognize and notice when they have these thoughts and to capture them. You can do it by voice-activated dictaphone, use your mobile phone, but I encourage clients to write them down because writing encourages the use of a different part of the brain, logic and reason. When you start to write something down, it stimulates your left brain, which sequences and analyzes and so on. So you're not just stuck in the emotional response part of the brain. So, is there any evidence for this? Yes, there is. There's been masses of research done. In the treatment of depression, statistically, CBT has been proven to change brain chemistry without medication. And that's why it's endorsed in most countries, certainly in the UK, the National Health Service, and throughout the private sector. I find that in Dubai, for example, health insurance providers are very happy to sign off on their clients who covered for psychological therapy to have CBT for all sorts of depression, anxiety conditions, and you can bring in other modalities as well, but CBT was the one they were most comfortable with because they know that it's a proven track record of many, many clinical trials. Brett conducted well over 400 just himself, and there have been many others, not only with depression, but also for what I was referring to before, personality disorders, randomized controlled trials, proper, blind controlled trials for things like personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, etc. Initially with medication, but then often the client being weaned off the medication and learning that they can actually do it for themselves. And if you want to follow this up, we've got a reference there for you. If you look up academyofct.org, you'll find all sorts of the research papers. I'm also putting in an NB there because it's not CBT, but I personally more and more now recommend that clients who are suffering from various kinds of mental health problems check out the relationship between nutrition and mental health. In particular, orthomolecular, and orthomolecular is conducted by medical doctors, but who understand the benefits of nutrition on mental health, and also functional medicine. You don't need to be a doctor to be a functional medicine practitioner, though many are. So they will recommend supplements and a review of worldwide studies found that add-on treatment with, for example, high-dose B vitamins, including B6, 8, and 12, significantly reduce symptoms of schizophrenia. And there's also a correlation between low levels of D3. So I can give you a personal example. I'll only do it briefly here because we haven't got much longer now. Someone who did a course with us went off and had a cousin who had been diagnosed as schizophrenic and for years had been on lots of medication for schizophrenia, and she was still having auditory and visual hallucinations. Her father was her carer, and over the years he'd become very depressed, seeing her make no improvement and being so unhappy and still having the problems and putting on a lot of weight because of all the medications. So he was on antidepressants. And the student went off and checked out with our guidance to go and check this out, and came up with, they should put themselves on D3 and also high levels of B vitamins. And within 2 weeks, his cousin stopped having hallucinations. And the father was so happy to see the improvement in her that very soon after he came off the antidepressant medication. Now, the guy that went off and did this was not a physical, he was not a doctor, he was not a physical practitioner, but he had an open mind and was willing to go and check it out and encourage his family, look, check this out, it can't do you any harm and it may well do you some good. So I'm a big fan of a multimodal integrative approach, not just, as I said, a one size or one modality fits all, though obviously I'm focusing on CBT here. There was a study done in Toronto in Canada where they did pharmacotherapy, drug therapy, as against cognitive therapy, and they did pre and post-treatment brain scans. They found both kinds of treatment changed the brain, but with the cognitive therapy, the changes were top down. With the drugs, it was bottom up. Now, what does that mean? It means the antidepressants affected a part of the brain that was different from the CBT treatment. So the antidepressants dampen activity in the limbic system, in the primitive brain, in the flight or response, emotional responses. But the CBT calmed the activity in the cortex, which is the brain seat of reason. So that's why it's a lasting change. You know, when someone's taken drugs, it doesn't change the brain permanently, only as long as you take the drugs. And even now, there's very, very new research showing that there's no evidence that serotonin levels are actually any lower in people that are depressed. So that's an interesting challenge to received wisdom for some years. And so Beck actually says, you know, if people are not educated, they don't have the education, then they don't learn to do things differently. And he believes that over many years, that cognitive therapy does seem to be a cure sometimes. In other words, not just it helps, but the problem goes away. What we say by a cure is that's it. It doesn't come back. You're better. So evidence that CBT works, the client becomes their own therapist. They start to understand their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And therapists, counselors, coaches, all sorts of health and wellbeing professionals can learn CBT and also can incorporate it into hypnotherapy and other modalities. So I'm just going to end up now with a couple of things, just a brief comparison of CBT with hypnotherapy for those who have practiced both or experienced both or interested in both. Both are structured, both take short time. CBT traditionally 15 to 20 sessions. With hypnotherapy, it can be anything between 1 and 15 sessions. If they're longer sessions, maybe 3 to 8. Personally, I usually do 3 to 5 sessions of 1.5 or 2 hour sessions, depending. And that's what most of my clients require, is 3 to 5 sessions. Specific assessment and diagnostic instruments. Well, hypnotherapy doesn't necessarily do that, though many hypnotherapists do use an initial questionnaire and do a pre-talk. And if you are a hypnotherapist or practice it, this is where it can be great to incorporate CBT approach within the pre-talk. So then you've got the conscious mind, understanding and on-side, as well as the subconscious mind that you're going to work with the hypnotherapy. Both identify core negative beliefs. In CBT, it's through conscious processes. Through in hypnotherapy, it's through subconscious processes. Both use reframing, one using conscious awareness to reframe, one using parts therapy to reframe. Both focus on specific thoughts and feelings and seek to replace them. CBT is more structured. Hypnotherapy can be structured, but isn't always. There's a big thing in hypnotherapy, in CBT, to use homework, if you like, self-help tasks, reinforcement, the client's responsibility, do it. Some hypnotherapists do that and give people reinforcement, CDs, audios, whatever. But some rely on more instant cure, fix changes, especially if they're using NLP. CBT uses SUD, subjective unit of discomfort or disease, which you may have come across if you've done EFT. Hypnotherapy sometimes does, but the biggest difference is that hypnotherapy obviously focuses on regression, analytic work, often does parts therapy, whereas cognitive therapy doesn't tend to focus on the past. The focus is on the here and now. This is where hypnotherapy can be very useful when someone's done CBT but still finds there is stuff stuck there, that they've still got trauma that's not being released. Then the hypnotherapy can be applied, which is why, as I said, a number of CBT therapists like to learn hypnotherapy to use to complement their CBT practice. So both are active. Hypnosis can be directive. CBT certainly is. When I say directive, I don't mean you tell them what to do, but you guide them and encourage them more so than hypnotherapy necessarily does. Both are time limited. Both, particularly CBT, have a lot of structure. Both are focused on solving problems and finding solutions. And the research that's been done to date, there needs to be more of it, is that when you add hypnosis or hypnotherapy, it does substantially enhance the treatment outcomes in CBT therapy, to the point where Dr. David Cato, who we first started working with his course and then developing it ourselves, had fantastic success rates using CBT alone. But when he added hypnotherapy to it, his results became outstanding. And so we encourage people to use CBT, but they can bring hypnosis and hypnotherapy and other modalities into it and will often get better results. So it's client-centered, very flexible, all these things which you'll see often on hypnotherapy sites and others as well, but there is evidence for this. And I would say that when it comes to eating disorders and OCD, I would say that whilst hypnotherapy is useful as an adjunct, CBT is definitely the therapy of choice. It's the one that has by far the most lasting success rates with these very challenging behaviors, eating disorders and OCD. And the last slide I have is, and then as I said, I'll open it to questions for those of you who need to go, find those who would like to stay and ask questions or make comments. I just want to let you know that if you are already working in the field in some capacity that's relevant, it's not just as someone coming in off the street and saying, I'm interested in CBT, I'd like to get a diploma. Occasionally when someone's widely read or interested, I've let them come on the course, but you can only take the exam and pass it if you have some kind of background that's relevant or useful. And we are doing, at the moment, there is an early bird offer that's on until Wednesday, but we are going to do, until Saturday, was it 12? Yeah, Saturday. We are going to extend the next webinar that I run, we're going to extend another 48-hour discount. So that's why that's in there now. So at the moment, until the early bird discount, you can pay the discounted price. And this includes everything. It includes substantial, a very large amount of resources, materials, 2 intensive weekends with some tasks set in between that are not examined, but to help you to understand and practice. And then those who are complete beginners, like to go into the field, we put this off because of the whole lockdown situation, but we just wound down after many years of teaching our diploma in clinical hypnotherapy with psychotherapy and counseling. And we're now going to be running a 2-year part-time diploma. Most, if not all, will be online, and it will lead to a British qualification as a fully fledged psychotherapist and counsellor. And we're not sure exactly when. So if you're interested in that one, if you let us have your contact details, we'll keep you posted when it does happen. So that's for both newbies and people who are working in the field but would really like to develop more skills and modalities as an integrative psychotherapist. So as I said, I've trained psychiatrists, psychotherapists from other disciplines, trained people in these who are complete beginners, but they've got the right kind of personality, good rapport building skills, good empathy. You don't have to have a background of academic psychology. And in some cases, people who've got clinical psychology qualifications are not as good as therapists as people who started out as just a homemaker, but people like talking to me and I have empathy. Some may bring it, I'm not saying it's because you're a clinical psychologist, I'm saying that within the sphere of clinical psychology and psychology in general, it doesn't mean that an academic discipline makes people a good therapist. Some are and some aren't. And we take people on who don't have the background, because in the UK, you can come to it as a new skill. As long as you're over a certain age and have got the right kind of background, then we take people on who are newbies, and they're some of our most successful therapists. So over to you if you would like to, if you have to go now, I quite understand. A few people have had to leave now, I know, because we're up to time almost. Well, actually, we are just over time by a couple of minutes. But anyone who would like to ask me any questions, or is anything else that they would like to raise, please go ahead. I'm happy to take questions or comments at this stage. So Fatima, please go ahead and ask your question or make your comment.
Thank you for the lecture. It's really informative and I learned a lot about the CBT. But in some communities, the CBT is, I don't know, it's still considered as a taboo. Like many people, they still have mental health issues like insomnia, depression. But due to the society they live with, like for example in India, I'm from India only. They are very hesitant to approach to a psychotherapist or psychologist or even a psychiatrist. So how to break that, what do you call that, hesitancy to reach to the therapy they needed for their issues?
Well, first of all, I would say that there are many societies and cultures where they regard mental health problems as a form of weakness, and it's to be a source of shame, etc. I think we're beginning to make inroads in that. I certainly have had a number of students and graduates from India and Pakistan who are making good headroads. They're setting up things like telephone counseling services, online services, so that people don't have to have the stigma of feeling, oh, they're, you know, being seen going into somewhere. And that's certainly, online work can be very helpful for people in that category. I've worked with clients, my clients, not just students, from the subcontinent. We've also been, you know, we deliver courses in Karachi and so on, and I have students online. But I think online and phone services is a way to help around that. I don't think CBT you have such a problem with as you do, for example, as hypnotherapy and the things that are seeing a bit woo-woo, even though they're not, I hasten to add, but because there is such a huge amount of evidence-based research, so you can point to this is evidence-based and it doesn't in any way go against culture. You can be a good Muslim, you can be traditional, but still be healthier, happier. I would go with whatever it is that people are concerned with, you know, so if they're concerned with family, it's like, if you want to be a good parent, if you want to be a good partner, if you want to help your family, then this is a great way to go, is to learn about yourself, how you tick, and then you can help others. I had a lot of members of the Bori community. Firstly, I had one of the Bori community for the Middle East. Was her husband was the leader, and she came on the course and she loved it. And she she was like the go-to counselor, you know, for the community. They didn't go to counselors outside, but they would go to her with their marital relationship, parenting problems. And so she came to learn hypnotherapy and counseling so that she could help them better. But then she started telling people she knew in the community how much it was useful. So the next year we had about 6 members of the Bori community coming on the course. And we then got invited to Karachi to go and run courses for teachers and professionals in Karachi. And they even took us off to meet people in the HR and the banks and dare I say it, the pharmaceutical companies who wanted to know more about this stuff. And so I think it's a question of coming at it lots of different ways and to actually challenge the perception that this is about weakness. It's not, it's about being strong. It's about having strength and resilience. So you can emphasize that CBT focuses on self-help, focuses on learning how to help yourself so that then you can help yourself and help others in your family and community, rather than you're weak, you're dependent on a therapist, etc., etc. So that's one of the ways that I found. There are many others, and I often discuss with my people I supervise and mentor how they can tackle that. But as I said, one way is offering online and telephone services, and apparently they've been very popular in those communities where the people can just call up and nobody knows who they are. They have anonymity, they have confidentiality, and they don't have to be seen going into a facility or an office. You know, taking it sometimes into the workplace, HR professionals, mediators, etc., may bring some of these techniques in without calling it therapy and saying, you know, if you want to understand yourself, it's really useful to understand how your thoughts and feelings work without using the word therapy. It's like with hypnotherapy. If people come from a community where they don't like the word hypnosis or hypnotherapy, say, call it relaxation. Relaxation response work. You've learned how to manage your relaxation response to get over your stress.
Or like
stress management.
Yeah, instead of therapy, you can call it as talking to like a friend or maybe like a professional who knew how to, who will tell something that.
I'd avoid the friend. I mean, the friend thing up to a point, but the thing with the friend is obviously there are boundaries that are different when you're working as a professional.
Yeah,
but certainly you could say something like a skilled helper, a professional who's almost like a friend and has a very friendly attitude, but they're skilled because they've learned certain things and they can help you to learn those things for yourself. So those sorts of approaches can help get over the therapy thing for people who think it means you're weak or a wuss in some way. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that question. Someone else had a question. Valentine, is it, or Valentine? You're welcome. Valentine or Valentine? Can you put your audio on? Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know, maybe someone else wanted to say something. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, well, you go ahead as you're there, and then I'll come to Samra after, because I haven't heard from you so far.
Yeah, hi. So I actually wanted to know about the credentials. So how, because I live in the UAE, so is it like an accepted credential to practice in the UAE? This is kind of the question.
Have you already got a background or a training in some form of, you know, therapy, coaching, counseling?
Well, I have a conversion degree in psychology from the UK, so it's accredited by the BPS.
Yeah.
So like I would be able to like basically work in the UK, but because I live in the UAE, I need to pursue like basically a bachelor's degree here, which I'm doing. So I'm gonna have so I have a conversion degree, but I'm doing a bachelor's degree in psychology in the UAE.
Can I just ask you why you're not doing a master's rather than doing a bachelor's when you've already got conversion?
They would not accept me at the university here, so they don't accept.
No, but what, did you not think about doing one online?
Yeah, well, the thing is, for accreditation in the UAE, they say that they will not accept online degrees. So that was the question. So for a license, so my degree is accredited, but for a license, they don't accept online degrees. So that was my question, because for accreditation, let's say for a private clinic, they might accept the CBT like credential, yes, which that's great. But so that's my question. Would a clinic accept it after I have my license from the UAE? Because, you know, those are two different things.
Right. This is, I'll give you as simple an answer I can. It's a complex issue because some people, a lot of my graduates have ended up actually deciding that they would set up a free zone company of their own, coming under, depending on which free zone it is, under lifestyle consultancy, where they would actually practice therapy, etc., but they would do it under lifestyle consultancy. Some people have got themselves in with clinics on the basis of their existing credentials, and so clinics will sometimes accept those conversion degrees. So it's kind of an individual process. Personally, one of the reasons I don't want to play with the KHDA and so on is because I was advised not to by an official. When we first went over, hypnotherapy used to actually be licensed by the Ministry of Health, by the way, and then they withdrew the license in 2011. And so we have this odd situation where you can practice hypnotherapy anywhere else, even under a license of management consultancy. People do it in their offices and things, but not in a clinical setting that's registered or licensed by the Ministry of Health. But if you're already a doctor or a health professional, then you can. I've had psychology graduates in Bahrain, which is similar to the UAE in this way. I'm working as a psychologist with only a simple psychology degree, not even a postgrad, but then trained with us so she could actually do more effective therapy. So the question is kind of what your situation is and how you want to get around it, whether you're bothered about working in mainstream or not. And if you are, many of our graduates have now done the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology, which is both taught and online, and they've actually helped them to get around the online thing by just issuing the degree certificate and not calling it an online degree, because it's the same content, same standards and everything, and that's been accepted. We've got a graduate who's a nurse in Bahrain who's now been accepted for a PhD program, having done the Masters as an online degree, and he's now actually, the public health have agreed that he can set up a clinic for a psychotherapy clinic, including seeing chronic pain patients who he's worked with clinically as a nurse. So there are often ways around it, but it depends on the individual situation. So it's kind of a bit of a career counselling session if required for that. There is the clinical psychology degree in Al Ain, as I understand it, but I think it's full time. I'm not sure. And of course, there are a number of degrees in psychology in the UAE, but none of them are particularly strong on counselling psychology. The Middlesex degree has a module, but I've had students who've done the Middlesex degree and they say it's basically just going in and observing from a module. It doesn't give you applied skills. One girl, I said girl, she's a young woman, just I'm older, so I heard she was a girl, who got first class honours in the Middlesex degree at the same time as getting a distinction of our longer diploma course. And she actually got work as a school counsellor. Other people who've had other kinds of degrees and masters in education, say, have managed to get in. So it's a question of, as I said, what you want to do, whether you want a private practice. They're very few and far between actually places that employ people. Mostly people work themselves. And by the way, I've had a number of school counsellors who are not Ministry of Health. They come under Ministry of Social Development and KHDA and so on. Now they've come to us for training, both the full longer course, and also the CBT course like the one I'm about to run, and they've had that accepted for their continuing professional development which I think they're required to do at least 15 hours a year. That's been counted as their professional development so that they can incorporate CBT into their work. So it's a bit of a piece of string question, I'm sorry to have to say, in terms of answers. There aren't simple answers. There are a number of ways around it, but it's a question of what you want to do. So maybe if you think through what you want to do, and check out some of the options, you can, send me a message or follow up with me, and I'll give you my best guidance. But I know that the regulation in terms of free zones and so on is changing all the time, and I'm probably not the best person on the latest, because we keep up our company as training and consultancy in the UAE. But as I said, we're working almost entirely online now, and we're planning to move back to the UK in the near future. And so I will continue to offer courses online to the UAE and the GCC region, but I'm not sure if we'll continue to keep the institute registered there or not at the moment. It depends on how complicated it is to do that. So I hope that helps to start you with the process. But what I can say is it's worth, this course, the CBT course that I run, is worth 40 units of, I don't know if I got it on there, I don't think I have. It's worth 40 units of continuing education units, both from the teaching online and the work that you do between the sessions and the exam that's taken after. And so that's accepted by the professional bodies. And, once you work your way around how you're going to work in the UAE, I'm sure that you won't have a problem using CBT and saying, I have a diploma in CBT that's UK accredited. But it's not, as I say, a stamp. If you didn't have any other qualifications or anything, I'd say no. But if you're working on a conversion degree and you're, I would like to see maybe a way around where you could get straight onto a master's. But so if you're doing a bachelor's, they'll accept that. Then you could incorporate the CBT certainly into your work once you've got your psychology degree under your belt. Does that help? I hope so.
Yeah, no, it's really helpful actually. So I will just maybe drop you a line, and then maybe you can give me like a little more guidance. We could have this like one-on-one, like whichever way it works for you. And yeah, it's very helpful. But yeah, I would like to pick your brain. Yeah. Like
what I'll do is I'm happy to refer you also to I have a graduate who did the Middlesex, not Middlesex, the UK degree I was talking about, the Buxton University. I said we had several do that. Applied positive psychology. Now she actually did it online, but she by choice, not for accreditation particularly, but because she wanted, she missed face-to-face learning. She went over for some modules, I don't know how many exactly, to the UK, but she got her master's in applied positive psychology, and she is now running a licensed child psychotherapy clinic, extremely successful, does a lot of online work as well as some face-to-face work. She runs parenting programs and so on. She's done extremely well, Claire. And as I said, she did the majority of her master's. She was a teacher to start with. She didn't have a degree in psychology, but she is a licensed child psychotherapist now, having got the master's. So I can put you onto people like her. If you have a one-on-one session with me as a kind of career counselling session, then I charge for that. But to refer you to people or give, point you in the right direction, I'm happy to do that as as freebie. Okay.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can do both. I understand that you will charge for that. That's fine. As well as like the referral would be very helpful. So yeah, we can, I have your contact is in the invite, I think, right? So I could maybe just drop you a line.
If it's not, I'm going to, I did put it in at the beginning, but to save you room of looking for the chat, if I just put my contact details in here again, so that's my email address, and my WhatsApp contact is here. Okay. And somebody has asked me a question, how much CBT effective in neurodevelopmental disorders? Well, that depends, on what the neurodevelopmental disorder is. Whether we're talking sort of autism spectrum, whether we're talking about other kinds of like maybe congenital or birth damage or whatever, it's going to vary. One thing I like to add in, for example, is to say, I went to a talk several years ago, the Arab Health Foundation. Anyway, they ran this annual Arab Health Foundation conference in Dubai, and it had a section which sadly it doesn't seem to have anymore, not regularly, which was on different complementary, alternative, holistic approaches. And they actually had a number of people there, which was really interesting. And there was an acupuncturist there who's a Chinese American who's developed scalp acupuncture. And he showed extract from a documentary film that was being made about him. And he has what looked like, really almost miraculous things, where people going in with cerebral palsy, with brain damage, having had strokes, having had all sorts of things, who can't walk, immobile, or one side or the other is paralyzed, and he's had them walking out of the clinic, not needing their wheelchairs anymore. So I was very impressed by him. So if anyone wants to know that, write to me. And I haven't got it on the top of my head, so I can't write it down, but I have contact details, and I was told that he was going to be training some of the acupuncturists in Dubai to do this. So if you're interested in that, that's not CBT, obviously, but there's no reason why you couldn't use some CBT processes. But someone who's got severe neurodevelopmental issues is going to find it very difficult to follow the rational step-by-step process, the cognitive processing involved. So you might be better off with some body work, some body work, whichever approach to start with, then see how that goes, and then maybe introduce some CBT principles within that. Okay, so who else? So Valentine, or is that Samra? No, we had Valentine. So who else has got their hand up now? Is Valentine? Did you?
Hi, this is Valentine.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask about the CBT diploma. Do you have a flexible timing, like say between 5 up to 10? Something like that, instead of 11 to 7 p.m.
It's not flexible timing. It's flexible for me because it means I have to get up really early. I deliver it over the course of 2 weekends. So it's a Saturday and Sunday, now that UAE's now moved to Saturday and Sunday. And it runs from 11 in the morning, the UAE Gulf Standard Time, which is 8 o'clock in the morning Moroccan time. And it runs until 7 on both those days over one weekend, then there's a gap of a weekend, and then the next one is run. So I've done it on a weekend. That's the best I can do. But I don't like to break it down more than that, because then you get the issue, oh, I can do Mondays, but not Fridays, etc. So I gave up trying to run it as an evening course or over a longer time. So at the moment, that's the deal. I don't know how things will be in the future, but we'll be on similar timings to the UK, to the Morocco when we're in the UK again. But that's the timings of it. And a number of people have taken time out or taken it as leave, made a case to their employers that it's something that's relevant to their employment. And some have even got funded to do it. Not that many, mostly people have had to fund themselves. But that's the most flexible that I can be. Occasionally, if someone has to leave a bit early or join a bit early and they attend the bulk of it and they have a study buddy and they're responsible about it, they've managed. But anyone who's taken big chunks out or said, I can only do one of the days each of the weekends, it doesn't usually work very well because they've missed out too much, and they, they can read and so on, but that's not the same as doing the sort of case study discussion part of it. Best thing is if you contact me privately for your own personal situation, and I'll tell you the best that I can do for you. Very rarely I take on people to do individual courses with them, but then obviously that costs them more. And at the moment I'm reluctant to do that because we'll know by the end of this month, but we're hoping and planning to move by the end of March. And so we've got an awful lot on our plates at the moment. So I'm running this course in February, and then I'm not sure when I'm going to do it next again. And obviously I have other commitments as well, but we've got a lot of packing up and things to do to relocate to the UK from Morocco. So yeah, it's that's what it is at the moment. The one that I'm promoting at the moment is, I said, UAE time, 11 till 7. From the 11th to 12th and the 25th and 26th of February. As I said, any other queries about your individual circumstances, just drop me a line, okay?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Samra, you had your hand up.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I'm asking so many things.
You don't need to apologize for asking questions.
Okay, great. So basically it was sort of a bit about my background and not being sure whether I'm suitable or not, because I did my midwifery course and was a midwife, and then after that I did my master's and things, but I don't have current UK midwifery registration or anything like that at the moment because I took time out and it lapsed and everything because of having a family and all this kind of stuff, everything. But CBT, as I say, is something that I'm very interested in. But what would be my process going forward? If I did the diploma, would it be something I could call myself a CBT therapist and work to help people with CBT, or?
What you would need to do would be to get yourself, unless you work under one of the, or had someone who was willing to take you on in one of the existing, centers, obviously people like Illuminations and so on, and other well-being centers take people on to do counseling or coaching with specific angles, right?
Okay.
And so it would be possible if you're either self-employed. I think most people, they either have to be on some kind of, either on a husband's visa. Sometimes they do it in their own right. But as I said, the majority of people we've trained, they set up, because it's the cheapest way to do it, a sole operator as a free zone company, and then they call themselves a consultant, and then they consult and maybe do online stuff as well. So you could offer CBT within that. You could do a coaching qualification and bring the CBT into that. But if you wanted to just do, for example, if you decide you wanted to focus on pregnant women or postpartum women, parents preparing for childbirth, etc., and bring CBT into that, there's absolutely no reason you shouldn't do that. And you, again, to have your own company means you don't have to be a professional licensed in that field. For example, a physiotherapist graduate of ours was registered as a physio in Dubai, but then she married a Brit who lives in Germany, so she moved to Germany. So in Germany, they're very protective of anything with the term therapy or psychology in the title. They require a first degree in psychology, sometimes master's. But she actually trained with us, and she also did a coaching qualification, but she works as a coach, and she uses CBT and hypnotherapy therapeutic techniques within her coaching practice. But she said to me, when she was thinking of staying in the UAE, what she was going to do was actually to get the license, and then to have her own company, and the company would be called well-being coaching, something like that, and it would come under lifestyle consultancy, and then she would do, and she used actually what she learned within her physio when she was even working as a physiotherapist. She would do suggestions, she would kind of work with sports people and people with injuries to boost up their morale, their self-esteem. Claire, who I mentioned, who was an educator and works with kids and parents now, she actually worked she was very sporty as well. She trained as a yoga instructor too, and she was doing all sorts of coaching with sporting professionals who are at high end, like with both adults and kids who worked in regional or even national, international level of sport. So that she coached tennis professionals. I had someone who was into riding and horses, and she was coaching, working with the community and working with people like who'd lost their nerve because they'd fallen, or so that people can be very creative with how they use what they've learned. It's a question of what they like doing. We had someone who was already a very successful coach with women, and she liked working with women of a certain age who were in transition, sort of middle-aged, and so she actually learned CBT and also hypnotherapy, and she said it took her coaching skills to a whole other level, because she was able to transition. Coaching normally says, you just work on enhancing performance, but if you've also got therapeutic skills, then if someone has emotional reaction and they get upset and so on, then you can actually seek into a therapeutic mode, but still put it under the title of coaching, and that's okay, So coaching is not so regulated in the same way that therapy or things with the word therapy in are. So as I said, I think the question is deciding what you want to do, a bit like I answered, the other question. And when you know what you want to do, how you want to work, is a question then looking at how am I going to get there? What's the easiest way to do it without jumping through too many hoops and spending years and years picking up all sorts of degrees? Because as I say, the good thing about the UK is it does have a structure. Psychotherapy and hypnotherapy, they did a whole what can you say, like a report and investigation to see whether they should be legally regulated, and decided they shouldn't, they needn't be. But that's when they set up the CNHC, because they wanted to put things like hypnotherapy, Alexander technique, homeopathy, and so on which have their own bodies, but to put them under one government regulated body, but not legally regulated. So you have to do the things that they take you on and put you on their register. You've got to have a training that meets their approval, etc. But you don't have a legal regulation like you do if you're in medicine or nursing or midwifery or whatever.
I see.
It's a very different set of standards. It's it's professional standards, authority standards. So, you know, in the UK, the majority of counsellors and therapists do not have psychology degrees. The majority are people who converted to do professional qualifications which are not legally regulated because it doesn't require them, quite frankly. What we need is good standards, but what we don't need is lots of regulation that limits what people can do, because you can be very creative in the field of psychological therapy. You don't have to be in a, as I said, a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist to do a great job of that. And that's the history in the UK. Obviously, in America, every state is a bit different. Some you can't even use the word hypnotherapy. For some, you have to have a first and second degree. For others, you don't. It really varies. So it's a question of where you are, checking out what the local regulations are, and how can you get around that and bring in what you do in a way that's helpful to people. You're probably in the same situation as the other lady. If you've got any specifics, do some research, check it out. I can recommend, I mean, there are lots of them, but the one I recommend that we use is Creative Zone. They've been our PRO for ages and helped us set up our company 11 years ago or so. And they know all the latest, you know, where's the best place to get your company registered, which free zone, which are the ones with the most flexibility, where you can do your own thing, etc., etc. And that does avoid things like having to keep accounts and so on. So there are a lot of benefits to running a free zone company, but you do have to renew it yearly, and you also have to renew your, I think they're changing the resident status to 2 they're reducing it to 2 yearly from 3 yearly. But if you're on a husband visa, then you can actually get an exemption letter, or that's the last I know of it anyway.
Okay, so, I guess, yes, sorry to interrupt. I guess so was my main concern was that not being registered as a midwife currently, it wouldn't take away from me trying to do the CBT training or anything like this, because when I was looking,
if you've already qualified and worked as a midwife for years, people are going to take you seriously. You're not offering to do their birth for them, so you're not breaking any professional rules. Obviously, if you were saying I want to be a home midwife, then that's another thing. You need to get licensed. But if you're wanting to do it more as an educational process, you know, guidance, counselling, coaching process, then that's a different matter altogether. And you probably well advised to get in touch with the doula community. I don't know if you know the Dubai doulas, but they're a very strong community of doulas, many of whom have got backgrounds. There's one who set it up in the first place, Betty, I'm trying to remember her surname, but she was a midwife, and I don't know if she still is a registered midwife, but she encouraged a lot of doula. There was a big conference where Janet Blasquez came over and so on. So there's a very active doula community in the UAE. So it might well be worth checking out with them. And some of them may, I mean, there are people who run hypnobirthing courses, you know, in the UK and all the rest of it. Mine's a little bit different because I do active hypnobirthing. So it's not just, it's not like Megan Mongan's Marie Mongan's hypnobirthing. It actually incorporates active birth, and it's much more, I would say, it's much more proactive and woman-centered. I find personally, I don't really like the sight of women who look like beached whales who are using hypnosis to override, you know, not eating during labor, and then they're eating during labor and using hypnosis to overcome the aversion to eating, and then often throwing up, you know, in transition and things. So I don't like that aspect of Marie Mongan's work. So I developed my own approach, and that's what I teach. And been very successful. I've had some midwives, one in Bahrain, who's a midwife, but she was from Zimbabwe, but she worked in the Saudi and then in the UAE for many years. And she primarily, I think, does therapy now rather than midwifery. And yeah, so there are people, again, who I could refer you to who might well have good up-to-date advice for you and suggestions for you that I can put you in touch with. If you send me, you know, find me a line, I'll put you in touch with Gladys and some others who have got good experience both of the health services and of therapy and working therapeutically.
Okay. I can't see your email address on here. I don't know whether I'm looking in the wrong place in the chat.
Go to the chat.
Yeah, in the chat, it's a message from, I think, Ruba, and I can't see anything else.
Direct message. Okay, I'll put it in. I don't know why it's come up as a general meeting chat. Okay, so if I see if I can change that to everybody, everyone. Okay, that's okay. Everyone in the meeting. All right, I'm going to put it in again as everyone in the meeting. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. At the very beginning, but that means scrolling right up to the very top. Okay, so transformance.com and then my WhatsApp, which again.
That's perfect. It's come. Thank you so much.
00212 71099 501. Okay, so those are both there to everybody.
That's great. Thank you.
217109501.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else got any other questions or anything? Oh, someone, Illuminations by Artisan Bites Bakery, LLC. I don't know them. Sounds good. Okay, it was wrongly sent here, but some of you might like to try the bakery. I'm not unfortunately in the UAE to be able to try it myself at the moment, so otherwise I would do. Okay, so anyone else got any questions or anything?
Yes, Dr. Leila.
Yes.
Yeah, good evening. This is Lisa. Just want to thank you for this webinar, and it's very helpful. I just have a quick question. I have a friend of mine that he's always posting like he is depressed and his anxiety, something like that. So as a friend of him, how can I help him that because every time when you say needs to go to that therapy or psychiatry, something like that, it's become negative to him.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, that, and I don't know that I've got the answer. I know that sometimes, not even a friend, but sometimes I've had people who've pitched up on my Facebook page, or somehow I've got they've got into my trail of messages, and I've sometimes posted to them encouraging messages, suggestions, etc. And I've rarely, oh sorry, that phone number's wrong. I've just seen, I'm to redo it. I'm missing it should be the WhatsApp number. It should be 00212. Sorry about that. I can just correct that and then I'll come back to you again.
Yeah, it's okay, because I just want to happen again that I have a friend of mine that
passed
away. It's regarding for the depression.
I wanted to help them, but what I have found is no, it's still coming up as wrong. Right, try one more time. 00212. Sorry, it's because I'm too much multitasking. Okay. 771099501. Ignore that last one. This last one I'm just posting now is the correct number. Sorry about that. Yeah, what I found was that it's almost like they're kind of indulging in their negativity. I compassionately saw it as a cry for help, but I noticed that whenever I put forward helpful suggestions or guidance, people who responded to me, a number of people responded to me positively, some of whom had attempted to help them, some of whom hadn't, but themselves were going through a hard time, but that person didn't actually respond. And you do have some people who are just kind of determined to be unhappy, and they hang on to that unhappiness. It's part of their identity. So you can put suggestions before your friend. You can be very indirect about it, like a hypnotherapeutic NLP or indirect way of dealing with that would be, I've noticed that some people, have a hard time, and they found that by trying this or by doing that, they've actually found it very beneficial to do so and so. Just saying, so very casually putting that out there. Or I wonder if you've heard of this thing. I went to a webinar the other day, and it was about cognitive behavioral therapy. And apparently not only with things like depression and anxiety and unhappiness, but even people with really extreme conditions like schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder have actually managed to get it sorted by getting good therapy from someone who knows what they're doing. And there's quite a few people like that around, and there's a lot of self-help stuff there too. And even some people might want to get some practice who are training in this field. So, you know, putting out these kind of suggestions, if they pick up on it and they want to run with it, or they say, oh, tell me more, then you've got an invite. But if people remember what I said about, I don't know if you were online earlier when I said the light bulb joke about therapists. If people don't want to change, then they won't. And no amount of trying to push them. And in fact, sometimes the more you try to push and encourage them, the more they resist, the more they're determined to prove to you that they can't be fixed, that nothing works for them. And so the best thing with them is to basically not engage with the negativity and set a role model yourself by being happy, by being resourceful. Maybe share with them things like, if you want to know what someone did who really had a hard time, you could recommend them Dr. Viktor Frankl, who I always recommend on my courses. He's the Jewish psychiatrist that managed to survive Auschwitz, even though all his family were killed in the camps, etc. And he went on to write a book called Man's Search for Meaning and become inspirational and set up institutes in Europe and in USA. And he is just a fantastic example of how you can actually use your mind to overcome even the worst kind of problems. You fill yourself and your own teaching and your guidance work with teaching stories, true ones, like the couple in Sri Lanka who set up an orphanage because their children had been washed away in the tsunami. They had to watch their children drown. And then they thought there must be so many children who watch their parents drown. And they started taking kids on. And the next thing, after a while, they actually set up an orphanage, which is still running as far as I know in Sri Lanka. So people who've actually taken a tragic event, a trauma, and they've actually turned it into something that's enabled them to do some good in the world. So if you fill yourself up with those sorts of stories and you have them around, you can always refer people to them. And for some people, they'll get inspired and they will do something about it. But as I said, those people who just want you to be sorry for them and feel hard done by, and they're still blaming their childhood, even though they're 40, you know, for their problems, these are people who are pretty attached to their suffering. So you can't really get into that, because it's like, my spiritual teacher once said many years ago, if you're in a boat and someone falls over the side, or, you know, there they are drowning, you can throw them a life raft, you can even lend them a helping hand as long as you've got a sound, firm footing in the boat, but don't jump out and try and save them from drowning, because they'll start to grab onto you and drown you at the same time. So it's important that you don't get caught up in someone else's negativity. Do your best to be as helpful as you can, but, you know, not that you're trying to rescue them, because that won't work. And some people are a bit like, I'm sorry to say it, a bit like energy vampires, you know, they'll take someone who's positive and they'll want to drain their positivity out of them, either by latching onto them or by being so negative that they try to bring them down because they can't bear the sight of someone else being happy and being successful or being fulfilled. So you have to watch out for that. And you know, it's been said by a few teachers, hasn't it? And gurus of self-improvement, be careful about who you surround yourself with, which friends you have and so on, because if they're all negative, focus on poverty, and I don't just mean financial poverty, but I mean, you know, poverty of spirit, poverty of emotion. If they're always blaming others, you know, for their situation, if they're saying, oh, it's not me that needs the therapy, it's my husband, whatever, then that's not actually a good sign that they're going to respond to therapeutic intervention. I don't know if that helps or not, but it's been my experience of working with people.
Yeah, because actually I received a lot of messages from some of my friends regarding for their family matters and everything. So, well, I just asked him, I hope I'm not on the line already to tell you everything, but this is what I can do. I can tell you, I can say to you that, or advise to you that whatever it is that it makes you happy, then just go on. Just go on.
Yeah, it's a pretty good. The trouble is, a lot of people don't really know what makes them happy. They don't really know what it is that makes them happy. So I sometimes say to people, find out what makes you happy, and then let's talk about what you can do to have more of it in your life. You know, and one of what they call the silver bullet questions in therapy is to say to your client, you know, assuming they're a client in therapy with you, okay, if you woke up and this problem had gone, or this problem has disappeared, it was no longer there, what would life be like? How would you know that you're happy? What would make you know that you were happy? How would you know that you weren't anxious anymore? What would be different? When they say, I want to be confident. Well, how do you become confident? Most people become confident by practicing, making mistakes, falling over, getting up again. So what would you be able to do that would make you know that you were confident? And they might say, well, oh, giving a speech in public. Fine. So let's work on how you give a speech in public so that you actually do things. That's why I say applied positive psychology. What can you do that will actually give you a sense of confidence? Because there's no such thing as a sense of confidence in itself. It's attached to something, right? It's, be confident means I can do X, Y, Z. So maybe you ask them, what would make you happy? What do you think would make you happy? And if they say something like £1 million, rather than saying, okay, so how are you going to make your first million? I might say that, but I'm more likely to say, oh, so you're sure that having £1 million will make you happy, are you? Because my experience is that many millionaires are not at all happy. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, but isn't it money, not love, that makes the world go round? Well, not in my experience, but if that's what you think, fine, go ahead and be rich. But, you know, just think about whether it really will make you happy or not. So you can ask these are all Socratic questions, by the way. These are inductive. They're intended to get someone to chunk down and look for what is it that they really want? What is it that they enjoy doing specifically, not just in general? So we want to be as specific as possible. So, oh, I'm always unhappy. Really? Were you unhappy when you tasted that favorite food of yours that you love? Were you really unhappy at that moment you bit into that, whatever it was? Oh, well, not for that moment. Oh, great. Oh, so does that mean to be happy I have to eat food all the time? No, but it's just an example of reminding yourself that you're able to feel happy, because you said that you couldn't feel, you couldn't feel happy. You don't know what it is to be happy. So you're challenging questioning, but keep it quite light, keep it quite fun, and don't get too heavy and serious about it, because that just brings you down. And also for those who are basically sabotaging themselves and wanting everyone else to be unhappy as well, it's kind of played into their issue, you could say. Another thing to watch out for, by the way, those of you who are either therapists or budding therapists or coaches, is when someone says, I know you're the one who can save me. I know you're the one who can do it. Be very, very careful about that, because that tends to boost your ego and give you a God complex. And that's not helpful for a therapist. We want to be humble. We want to be compassionate, but also know our limitations and what we can and can't do, rather than, oh, look at me, I can save people.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Leila. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're running to the end of to my time, and somebody been very patient and stayed online quite a while. So this is your last chance if you have a question to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to say good evening to you all, and hope to hear from you again sometime. And any of you who feel that the course is for you, will be for you, or would like to know more in order to decide, as I said, have a look. You've got a description of it. If you want, you can always contact me. I can send you more detailed course description, but do get in time if you want to get the early bird rate. I've already, I have a few places I can take people. We've already got a good core group in place that's registered. So we're looking forward to that happening in February. And after that, I'm not sure about dates, because I'm not sure when exactly we're moving, and I probably won't set dates for a while after we've moved, because we'll be too busy with the moving and house hunting and so on. Okay, so if there's no other questions or comments, I said you can always follow up with me. I'll say good evening to you and thank you for your time. Thank you for being attentive and engaged, and I wish you a successful and happy life, whether or not you go into CBT or anything else. Bye for now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.